What did she casually say that made you realize she wouldn't be your wife? Story 1. I have like 20 credit cards and most are maxed out. It's fine though, I'll get my husband to eventually pay them off for me, or I can file for bankruptcy and get new ones. When I tell you I ran, good Lord, I ran. Story 2. It actually wasn't what she said, but what my dad said. After a stupid fight at the end of a very abusive relationship, I was venting to my friend and my dad, telling them how she had called me pathetic because I asked her to stop calling me fat. She laughed and I hung up. My dad looks up and says, "How could you let anyone treat you that way?" I knew then, and there it was over. Story 3. I've told this story here before, so you might recognize it. My first girlfriend and I were long distance. It is not exaggeration to say that literally every cent of my disposable income was spent on her in some way, shape, or form. Trips down to where she lived, hotels to stay in during said trips, gifts, vacations, restaurants. I didn't make that much money, but I spent literally all of it on her. So on one weekend during that first year together, I had, as usual, taken a trip down to see her. Now, I'll be honest, I was completely spent. I had nothing more than my earthly possessions, a bus ticket home, and the irresponsibility of a 22-year-old man that makes all this possible. I knew that until payday, which was 4 days away, I would be limited to the food I had at home, which, if I recall correctly, was a loaf of bread and some rice. On Sunday night of that weekend, my girlfriend wanted to go out to dinner. So I was honest with her. I told her I didn't have any money. She told me that she'd pay. So as we were having dinner at some family restaurant, she seemed distant. I asked her what was wrong. She said nothing. When I pushed, finally she opened up. Mayumi, her best friend, has a boyfriend, right? I was talking to her the other day and she told me that whenever they went on a date, he would always pay. I feel really guilty for this, but I was kind of jealous at the time. I stared at her for a few seconds to process her words. Remember, this was a woman whom I had spent virtually every cent of my money on visiting and pampering. We had gone to a very nice restaurant the weekend before, which I paid for. 95% of all our trips were paid for in full by me, and she was talking about her friend's boyfriend who lived 10 minutes away paying for everything. She was a shitty girlfriend in general, but that was just the final nail in the coffin for me. Whether I knew it at the time or not, that was the exact moment I had mentally checked out of the relationship. Someone replied, I was once in the same boat. I drove next town to visit her over the weekend as usual. When I arrived, she was trying on all the new clothes she recently ordered and showed off. It was clothes worth $500 she proudly presented to me. Afterwards, I was going to make sandwiches for us, but I ended the relationship by tossing the damn sandwich I was preparing for her into her face when she started seriously complaining about me not bringing fancy food as always. She knew that I was broke to the last penny. She knew that our last vacation financially killed me. The sandwich ingredients I brought were my last available food for the rest of the month, and I was planning on begging my parents to help me out. It was this moment when I realized this woman is entirely self-centered, and I noticed that she actually never spent a single dollar for me. Money was her first love, not me. Story 4. When her son told me that earlier in the morning before school, his mom looked at him and said, I really miss when it was just us two. A month later, we were done. But hearing that phrase specifically after basically raising him without his father in the picture and literally taking care of him day to day, I knew in that moment she would never be my wife after saying something like that. Story 5. She told me she had a fantasy of being a MILF one day and sleeping with a younger man after we're married. She said, by the time it happens, you'll know that I love you, so you won't care. We had been dating 2 months, friends for 4 years. Story 6. Do you remember Jorge? I'm going to see him on this trip and will stay with him for 2 weeks. Jorge was her stalker who had followed her and moved with her to 2 different continents, 3 different countries, had hit her, essayed her, tried to get her into drugs constantly, and twice succeeded. For some reason, she thought, he's just damaged, really a good guy. I checked out after that and broke up with her a day or 2 later. Story 7. That she was thinking about how best to negotiate down the money her parents would demand from me for their blessing to marry her. I incredulously told her that her abusive shitbag parents would never receive a penny from me, and as the ensuing conversation unfolded, my vision of our life together went up in smoke. Story 8. You're a pathetic excuse for a man. I fucking hate you. We'd been going through a rough patch for a few months, but had been together for 11 years. She was drunk and angry, and it came out. She didn't remember saying it, and we never talked about it. TBH, this is the first time I've actually said or typed those words out. That was over 5 years ago, but it still hurts like hell. I called it off a few months later. She'd never said anything that hurtful to me before, but those words came from somewhere. I just couldn't get over them. Story 9. I don't care about your problems. You're a man. Act like it. We were dating for 2 months. She was already talking about marriage and kids. I told her to slow down. I was out of a 2-years-long abusive relationship, and even tough, I was really into her and had the intention of building a lasting relationship with her. I needed to build trust at a slower pace. My next message was literally, "Okay, we're done. Best of luck in life," and I never saw her again. Now I found the one, and we're doing great. Story 9. My ex-fiancée, this was years ago. I had a crappy car, so after the engagement, Middle East, so there's a ceremony, party, gold, lots of expenses, I decided to get a better car. 2 weeks in, I crashed it and had to pay a lot to fix it. I felt tight on money, and sadly, I opened up to her. She started sobbing and said she never imagined she would marry a broke guy. I wasn't broke. I just spent a big portion of my savings on the engagement and a car so that my old one doesn't break down on dates. Something in me shattered that day, and I never saw her the same. Things just kept going downhill, and I broke up the engagement 6 months before the wedding. I had gotten back to my old savings levels during this period. Story 10. She went to study abroad. I asked her to cool it with the clubbing. She had been 8 times in less than 2 weeks. She said she would. Instead, she doubled down. She went every day for 6 months. After I asked her if she was available on a specific day, a month in advance, she told me not to come, despite telling her I was saving money to see her. I am guessing she cheated, and when I put things together, that's what it points to. After that, I checked out. It still hurt watching her live life through my phone, and it still hurt when she dumped me 2 weeks before she got back. I was an idiot who didn't have the self-respect to walk away. I was holding on to hope she would change and that things would be different. She didn't change. When she got back, she had no love for me in her eyes. If I were in that situation again, I would have walked away. Edit, the part she said casually, "It's really not that big of a deal. I don't know why you're trying to control what I do." Story 11. Talk about how big her ex-private parts are or how wonderful the sex was. Someone replied, "Was it really small and the sex was crap?" Story 12. I'm checking to see if our star signs are compatible. Someone replied, after my ex broke up, I found out she was Googling astrology compatibility between her and the guy she was eyeing. Still baffles me how someone can put any value in that. Fast forward 8 months later, and she's crying at my door unannounced. Story 13. We both work, relatively equal time, effort, etc., and we own separate houses. She spends most of her off-work time at my place. I was doing all the cooking, dishes, the laundry, vacuuming, trash, etc. But I was getting really burned out. I got frustrated and told her I couldn't do it all. It wasn't fair, and I needed help and partnership. I told her I shouldn't have to ask her to do some of these things, that we are both adults and can see when the dishes need doing or laundry is piling up. She said, "You just want a housewife," as if she did a single solitary housewife thing ever. Marriage? LOL, no. Story 14. My ex broke a pretty big rule to our open relationship, which was no one we have emotional bonds with. It's meant to be just sex with strangers, and the emotional bonding would be between us. This was due to long distance. We had met in person and fell in love, but then visas, health, and higher education got involved, and then eventually COVID. They fucked their best friend a few times and decided to come clean over a phone call instead of video chat, and I assumed it was because they didn't want me to watch them cry. It wasn't until after I had finished pouring my heart out, crying, saying it was tough to hear, but I'm glad they came clean and I would need time and space, but I was willing to find a way to work through it. That's when they said, wait, let me just take you off speakerphone. They called me to have me on speakerphone with the person they cheated on me with. I hung up and ghosted them. An 8-year relationship. Story 15. She said I was the softest man she ever met. I turned to her and asked her, you want someone to abuse you or something? She couldn't answer it. From the moment she said that to me, I've realized she loves the toxic drama of abuse from someone that she has always experienced in her life. And when I mean all her life, even toxic abuse and emotional control from her mom. That concludes today's stories. If you like stories like these, please make sure to like and subscribe for more. If you have any opinions on these stories, let me know what you think in the comments below. I hope you all enjoyed today's story time, and I hope to hear from you all soon.